want to begin by saying that we were not among the social scientists or political scientists or pundits who, before the election started, knew that Bernie Sanders would do very well and that Donald Trump would get the nomination. In fact, so most of the data that I'm reporting on today comes from YouGov Economist survey, which is a recontact survey where we re-interview the same people, same 5,000 people once a month, and we have done so since May. And just to show you how prescient we were, apparently this is relevant to what you asked Bill Barnett, who chickened out with his response. It's all right. Bill and I are friends, I'll get him. So the question was, we were sitting around in May and there were like 92 Republican candidates for president. And so we're looking down and we say, well, we don't have enough room to put all this on. So Trump's name came up and we said, forget that. He's not a serious candidate. He won't be there in June. So as you see, we were exactly right. It turns out you'll see that turned out to actually be a benefit to us. And I'll show you why. And when I get there, I'll explain it again. So the first thing I want to say is that the United States has been in this period of, first of all, it's very nice to talk to an audience that was actually alive in 2000. I still teach Stanford undergraduates in like 2000. When was that? That was a time in which the Republicans, as you can see, had controlled the president and the House and Senate for 6 straight years, which was quite impressive. And it led Karl Rove with Nicholas Lyman, the New Yorker, to say the real prize is creating a Republican majority that would be as solid as the Democratic coalition. And Karl just wrote a book on the McKinley realignment, 1896. But the point is that that's in 2004. It looks like the Republicans are on a roll, and that's what happened, right? Because you remember 2006, and the Republicans lost 30 seats in the House. They lost 6 seats in the Senate. They lost 6 governorships. And then comes 2008. President Obama won big, House, Senate, 60-seat, filibuster-proof majority in the Senate. And then, of course, that caused James Carville to write this book, 40 More Years, How the Democrats Will Rule the Next Generation. Now, that book is remaindered with, it's all right, I have remaindered books also. The difference is I got tenure with mine. Okay. Then the point is, then came 2010, which is an unbelievable loss to the Democrats. They lost 63 House seats, 6 Senate seats, 7 governors, 17, they lost control of 17 state chambers, and all across the seats in the United States, they lost 675 legislative seats. And then, so as you can see, if we look at this period of, there's 2004, the stability, then there's instability, then there's stability, instability, instability, instability. So that's the first thing. We live in sort of unstable times. And the next thing I want to point out, that's not just us. This is an political instability index from 1945 to the present across the following countries: Austria, Belgium, Denmark, Greece, Ireland, and the Netherlands, small European countries. And you can see that, again, political instability in those countries is building up. Now, it's kind of a technical definition of political instability, and I always say, if you want to know, you can just email me at dbrady@Stanford. I'll tell you how we did that, and thus far I've got no requests. Because it's a pretty simple point. So the instability, and these are the big countries: France, Germany, Italy, and UK. Stability's up. And think about the UK. In 1951-52, in the United Kingdom, those 2 elections that one replaced Winston Churchill and then put him right back in. In those elections, the Labour and the Conservative parties got 98.5% of the vote. Today, stayed stable, mother of parliamentary democracy, Britain. In the last election, there were 6 parties. The 2 major parties got less than 65% of the vote, and there were 4 other parties that got over 5%. So the political instability is not just in the U.S. And so if we look at where's the last time we had political instability, of any of a similar period. It's the 1874-1896 period. Now, contrary to what a number of my undergraduate students think, I was not there I didn't observe this. But the point is, what's common to those two eras, and what is common that drives instability in the European Union? And the answer is globalization. This is the period of the first great transformation of the world economy, and this was nothing compared to the present transformation of the world economy. And what's basically happened is, in the United States and in all the European countries that I showed, the stability of the 50s, where countries essentially had a Labor Party or a party of the left and a party or parties of the right that opposed it. So in Italy, where they have 137 parties, there still was always the parties of the left, the socialist communists and their allies, and then the Christian Democrats, who were always somehow in the coalition. And what's happened is all those, and about 50% of the workforce, between 45 and 50% of the workforce in those countries was in fact good, solid labor jobs. And those jobs, unlike the 1890s, those jobs had unemployment compensation, they had vacation time, they had retirement plans, they had pensions. And those jobs now number of those industrial jobs in the US has gone down to maybe 12%. Most of the European countries, a little higher in some European countries, but it's still, they're declining rapidly. 20% would be a lot. And what happens during that period is, then the coalitions are hard to form. So the Democrats in the US were the party of the left, Republicans were the party of the right. In 1948, Harry Truman could actually win re-election on campaigning against Taft-Hartley and 14B, Clause 14B. So what happens is, as that goes, then the Democrats, they don't have that base, that labor base, those jobs, the industrial base. Then they have to try and find somebody else to find partnerships. So they combine with academics and San Francisco types. And guess what? Guys who work in factories don't exactly always agree with the politics of San Francisco. The same thing has happened in the European Union countries and in OECD countries. Political coalitions are not as stable as they used to be. They flip around because of this transition of these away from these jobs. So that's the background that says, so don't think that the United States and Donald Trump is just a particular phenomenon in the US. That's a phenomenon all over. Now, because of the US political institutions, in the US it has to happen within a political party. In France, because of the French political system, you get the Front National and Le Pen. And in Denmark, you get the Popular Front. So, but the point is, it's the same phenomenon, my view is, it's the same phenomenon occurring all across the world. And it's to the right, the populism of the right, because it's a question of immigration. Immigration drives a good deal of this. The only place where the populism is on the left is in Greece. And why is it on the left in Greece? Because no one is immigrating to Greece believing they're going to get a job. So the right-wing populism is in countries where the people are immigrating and they're picking up jobs, and that causes resentment. And so that's the situation. And so that's the context of the US election. The final context is, this is, I should actually spend about 3 hours on this because it took us years to collect this. This is all the Gallup polls from 1937, not all of them. It's 1,300 Gallup polls from 1937, the first Gallup poll, until that's 2016 actually. And this is party identification: Democrats, Republicans, Independents. So what I don't got to go through the whole history of it, but the point is, about 1984 with Ronald Reagan, what we got was a huge change. Over most of this time period, the Democrats had very solid leads. This is the lead coming out of the New Deal. This is the lead coming out of Goldwater, et cetera, the '58 recession, and that's the Nixon phenomenon. But now note, in 1984, it's not so much that Republicans rise, but that Democrats fall dramatically. Republicans were about there, and then they kind of even out, but the independents rise. And the fact is, we now have a political system where about a third of the members, a little over a third, are Democrats. Then there are Republicans, and finally, independents. So, but the bottom line is that this is a new political system, and it's, again, helps to create that instability I talked about. Okay. Now, what happened to the American political parties is that what people normally call polarization. I'm going to call this sorting. And so what do I mean by sorting? So imagine here's the Democrats prior to, again, it's nice to point this out. Some of you actually remember when there were Rockefeller, there were liberal Republicans, and there were conservative Democrats. So that's the poll. So at this time, imagine the party looks like it has 50 liberals, 30 moderates, 20 conservatives, and then there's some independents. But the conservative party has some liberals in it. Now what's happened is the switch is now the Liberal Party has 70 liberals, 30 moderates, and then the moderates, they've gone. So they have a few moderates in each party, but the parties have sorted. They actually look more like European political parties now, in that the Democrats are further left and the Republicans are further right. Because one is further left, further right, then what happens is there are more people in the middle who are independent. People move to independence because in the United States, independents are more conservative than Democrats on economic policy, but they're more liberal than Republicans on social policy. So generally, these independents are sort of in the middle, and they float back and forth depending upon candidates in particular elections. Okay, so now that's the background. Now we're to the elections. So these are pretty shocking numbers. This is how many government officials are crooked, and this is a question you believe that a lot of government officials are crooked. And now you can see the number in the early years here, not so many. In the Bush administration, Democrats thought there were more crooks, Republicans less, and now Republicans think there are more crooks and Democrats less, and independents in the middle. But note the numbers who think that there are a lot of crooks in government, that number has risen. The second number over here is people believing government is run for a few big interests. And again, you see partisan differences here, but they sort of start to average out here, and the number is increased. Just a couple more. Percentage believing government is run for the benefit of all by year and party ID. That number used to be Democrats, it was in the 40s, but you can see partisan differences. But note now that in 2016, Democrats, independents, and Republicans, about 6% of people believe that the government is run for the benefit of all. So that's a pretty dramatic decline. And then the number of people thinking government doesn't care about them has also risen to new highs. So you have, and then let me ask a question. We, at UGov, we did a couple extra besides the recontact, but we did an anger survey. How many of you hear or read something that makes you mad on a daily basis or more than once a day? Jesus, okay. Well, it turns out that about 57% of Americans hear something or read something or listen to something or listen to TV, something that makes them mad at least once a day. That's a pretty high number. And it was about 50% among you. So I guess because I'm a political scientist, it all makes me pretty cynical. So I don't get that mad. All right, down to the nominations. So the nominations are pretty straightforward. In each case, there was an establishment and anti-establishment, and the Democrats, the establishment candidate won. Now, it was, some people thought it would be another Hillary coronation, like 2008 was supposed to be, and it wasn't. Why? Because she's unpopular. And you can see, this is from July of 2015. Democrats favored her about 77, but 19% said they had an unfavorable view of her. 14% of Democrats said they never vote for her. Among independents, it was 64% unfavorable, and 39% said they wouldn't vote for her. And among Republicans, 87% said they never vote for her. So the fact is she was going to get some opposition. So the question is, no one thought that the opposition that would be successful would be what do we call him? The non-establishment candidate who'd been in Congress for 30 years. Bernie Sanders has been in Congress for 30 years. Hardly anyone ever heard of him, except people in Vermont. He was actually elected as a socialist not a very efficient senator by virtue of what he got passed, et cetera. So out of nowhere comes Bernie Sanders to pose a real threat to Mrs. Clinton. Now, this table says, so we asked a question on this Recontact survey said, do you believe that the American system favors the wealthy? And among people who said, yes, it does favor the wealthy, pretty sizable number. Here, among Democrats, even there, Mrs. Clinton managed to beat Bernie Sanders 51-43. But among independents, many of which are younger people, younger you are, the more likely you are to be independent, see that Sanders among independents who believe that, 52-19. So that's part of his base. Then you move to, if you think the American economy is sort of fair to most, then she really killed him, and his margin over her doesn't go. And among people who weren't sure, either way, she did very well. So the guts of his support came from these people who were worried about inequality, et cetera, et cetera. And that happened. A lot of Stanford students were, I don't know, they seem very worried about inequality. That's a little hard to understand. In the class, when I asked my public policy class, I said, so how many of your parents are in the upper class? They all raised their hands. So I stopped at that point. I want to make sure my teaching ratings are okay. Okay. Now here's the Republicans. This is 2012. So you remember that. So in establishment candidates, Mitt Romney always looked good. Then first there was Michelle Bachmann. Remember her? Down. And then along came the governor of Texas, Herman Cain. Remember him? Herman Cain was there, and then found out he was some executive, and then he had some affair, and he was gone. And then it was Governor Perry, and then he forgot what he was going to shut down, and then it became Newt Gingrich, and so on. But at the end, it was kind of like a King of the Hill day, where what happened is Romney was always the leader. Somebody would come up and approach him, and then they'd fall away, and ultimately Romney got the nomination. So that's a pretty typical pattern for Republicans, and that's why we didn't include Donald Trump. Okay? So I want to back off on this. So we had just finished a study of 7 European countries on immigration, and it turns out that there are 2 good predictors. One of the 2 best predictors of whether you were anti-immigrant was if you asked the question, you said, how has your family done over the last 1, 3 years, 5 years? Has it been doing better or worse? People who said their family's economic, financial situation was worse, they were the ones who were most anti-immigrant, okay? So we had asked that of our sample, but we didn't include Donald Trump because we didn't think. So here's the results. So you can see, of people, 38% of Republicans thought that their economic situation had been worse over the last year. So of them, when we asked what was their preference in May, the number one thing they were for, they had no preference. Number 2 was Scott Walker, who had about 13%, et cetera. Well, then Trump came in, made his anti-immigrant, made his build a wall in Mexico, et cetera, and then we'll cut back on the number of Muslims or whatever he said. And then now we have Trump in. Now look at. So of people who thought that their economic situation had worsened, their family situation had worsened over the last year, Trump now has 41% of these. That means, because that's 38%, that turns out to be about 3/4 of his support. So in July, he's the leader among 17 candidates with 22% of the vote. This is the basis of where the vote's coming from. And the question is, at that time, there's a lot of fighting in the Republican primary. So who's going to be the anti-establishment candidate? Well, Trump's there, Carly Fiorina's there, Senator Cruz is there, the surgeon is there, and so Mr. Carson's there. So the question is, they're fighting to be the outsider, and on the other side, they're fighting to be the insider. I want to be the insider. It's Bush versus Kasich versus Rubio, et cetera. And during all that fighting, nobody drops out. And the Republican Party had done 2 things. They pushed the delegate count up forward. They had more delegates earlier. And 2, they had more winner-take-all primaries. So Trump takes advantage of that. And so that's the good thing about us not getting that right was if we had had Trump in the first one, we wouldn't have noted that difference. Now, and here is just, so here I don't have the same group. This is less affluent Republicans. These are people who are Republicans who have high school or less and make less than $50,000 a year, okay? So you can see, compared to all the other Republicans, they always are more supportive of Trump, and in the end, they're like 21 in May and July, right when he's clinching the nomination. You can see he's 20 to 22 points more popular with less affluent Republicans than he is with other Republicans, okay? And that is a short story of how he gets the nomination. Okay, now during the course of the nomination, both Mrs. Clinton, their popularity doesn't really shoot up. This is Clinton and Trump. She has a little bit of an advantage on him, but remember, most Americans, still 54% of Americans have an unfavorable view of her. The reason she has an advantage is because even more people have an unfavorable opinion of Trump. So these are the two most unpopular candidates that since we've taken polls where we have any information, like starting in 40, we've had no information, nothing to compare to this. Okay. Now the elections. This is just one to show you that pollsters can be wrong. August 88, Bush is losing to Dukakis by 17 points. You remember President Dukakis. However, note, if you look at the rest of those, what really happens is when you make the largest number of errors is out, or the earlier you are. As you get past Labor Day, not much of a problem. The stuff tightens up. People who say they're going to vote for Trump are going to vote for Trump. People who say they're going to vote for Clinton are going to vote for Clinton. Things tie down, and it gets easier on those of us who do polling and write about the polls. It gets easier because public opinion stabilizes then, okay? So now I'm going to just talk a little bit about what happens, and these are 2 points that turn out to go against Republicans. First is turnout. This is turnout back 1788. And beginning about 1828, and I could explain that, but no one really cares. So, well, actually, that's Andrew Jackson, and because he got gypped out of the presidency, put political parties together, put elections on a regular basis, and the 1832 Census Act, but it's okay. But if you look across that whole time span, what you see is that in off-year elections, there's about it averages about 15%. 15% fewer people vote in off-year elections than vote in presidential election years. So who turns out? So this hurts Republicans because here's 2008, 2010. What happens is there are fewer, in an off-year election, there are fewer young voters, more older voters, more white voters, fewer black voters, fewer Hispanic voters. And since if you look at those groups generally tend to favor Democrats. In a presidential election year, you expect Democrats to do better than they did in the prior election. And so here are voter turnout by race in 2000, 2004, 8, and 12. And as you can see, this is white turnout, 2, 4, 8, 12. So as you can see, the number of white voters decreases over time. The number of African American voters increases. The number of Latino voters increases. And the number of Asian American voters increases. And since those groups are more Democratic on average than they are Republican, that means presidential elections are affected. And here's white share of the population in swing states. And so you can see, again, 8, 12, and 16. You can see generally the pattern. And these, I leave these slides on. And if anybody wants a copy of the slides, just ask them, not me. Well, given the pay I'm getting, it's okay. I'm 0. Okay. So that's why it was okay if you wanted to talk and not sit down for a while. Actually, my pay went up. Okay, so this is Latino share of the vote in swing states. So you can see Arizona, Colorado, Florida, Nevada, those percentages, the percentage of Latino voters are up. Arizona, Colorado, and Florida and Nevada are all swing states, and Latino voters are more heavily represented there, okay? And that should all, when you think about elections, you have to think about that changing electorate. And here's the African-American, Asian-American share of population in swing states. Virginia is one where it makes a difference, and Nevada is another, okay? So Republicans have, on average, I would say a 20 to 25% electoral college gap, given the way that set of voters is distributed across states. So how many of you are from California? Anybody here think Trump will win California? Okay. New York? Think Trump will win New York? Illinois? No. So, that's okay, I'm from Illinois too. They generally, by the way, they haven't admitted anyone from the American Midwest here for 30 years, so it's kind of me and you, it's me and you. So those are the states they just fly over. Okay, so the Republicans have this electoral deficit. It's about 20 to 25 in the Electoral College for the reasons I've tried. Now, it used to be a lot better to predict these elections, and this is the good part. And here is a quote from a book written in 2010 by Lynn Vavreck, a very good social scientist at UCLA. And this, she didn't say this, but the blurb of the book says, the economy is so powerful in determining the results of presidential elections, political scientists can predict winners and losers with amazing accuracy. And that was kind of true. And here's the most famous of the models, called the FAIR model. Not because it's particularly fair, but the guy who did it was Ray Fair, who's an economist at Yale. So now what's useful, what's interesting about this model is all the economic models are retrospective. All they want to say is, look, if the economy's doing well, the 2 or 3 quarters before the election, the president's party gets, people walk in the booth and they go, gee, the economy's pretty good, I'll support the president, or I'll support the president's party. If the economy is not doing well, they punish the president and they punish the president's party. So all that Ray Fair knows in this model, all he knows is what in the 2 quarters prior to the election is real GDP growth. That's all he knows. GDP growth minus inflation, that number, plus the number of quarters in the last 16 quarters where the growth was over 3. That's all he knows. He doesn't know how popular the president is. He doesn't know if we're at war. He knows nothing. And look at the model. Look at how it works. That is the actual versus the predicted. To know just that, pretty damn impressive. So, and then the other thing was the two years they really missed were 52 and 68. And, and then, by the way, sorry, in 2012, these models started to go wrong. Fair missed. A second model, by the way, is guns and bread. The second model said, well, the reason, there's 2 things at work. It's not just the economy. It's if Americans are at war somewhere, too many troops abroad, that'll hurt the president's party. And so this is a guns and butter. And note that the 2000 and 1952. So this is elections from 80 on. And the predictions are really pretty good. The only one that was really off was the 2000 election. And that was when Al Gore ran the worst campaign in American history. I can explain that later. So the bottom line, though, was they got all these right. And here's what Doug Hibbs' model predicted for 2012. Obama would get 45%. Here's Ray Fair's prediction for this year. Mrs. Clinton will get 45%. I think it's probably down to 44 now. But why is that? Well, if you're going to have a retrospective model of the economy, then people have to perceive the economy the same way. That is, if the economy is going to, all Americans have to say the economy is doing pretty well, therefore I'll reward the president, or it's doing badly, we'll harm the president. So here is our YouGov data. from 2008 to 2012. And here's the percent of Americans thinking the economy is getting better. So it moves just about like you'd expect it to move, only it depends on who you ask. Democrats thought the economy's doing great. Republicans thought it sucked all the way through. And independents were in the middle. So retrospective models can't work if Democrats think the economy is better or worse than it actually is. And in other words, if people are using partisan lens to say how well the economy's doing, those models will not be as accurate. Now, obviously, there's a lot of work, but if it's in the range of the economy grew between 1 and 2.5%, that is the range in which people would be able to disagree about the effects. If it grows 8% or you lose 18%, then that's probably not relevant. But we have now just collected the data back to 1992. But this phenomena first pops up where you get significant differences between Democrats and Republicans on how the economy's doing. It first pops up in about 2005. Prior to that, Democrats and Republicans, they moved together. Okay, so then how did Obama win? Okay, so here's the way. In 2012, there were 38% Democrats, 32% Republicans, and 30% independents. Obama won 92% of the Democrats, and Romney won 93% of Republicans. So roughly speaking, and they split the rest of it. So basically what happens is President Obama got the same percent of a bigger number that Romney got of a smaller number. So basically, if you think of it, going into the independents, Romney had to make up a 6-point difference. And he didn't, okay? He won independents, but he didn't win big enough. So overall, he loses 51-47. So here's, and when you think of the parties, parties are aligned by groups. So as we look at that, we see that men made up 47% of the electorate, and they voted by 7%. There was a gender gap. 7% of men voted for Romney. But among women, there was they made 53% of the electorate, and there was an 11% gender gap toward President Obama. So he gets a plus there. Among whites, Romney wins by about 20 points. Among blacks, Romney loses big. Among Latinos, he loses big. High school, now here's going to be a difference between now. High school graduates are about 25% of the population, and Obama won them. And now college, the opposite, college graduates, and as they have since 1952, when we have data on this, college graduates have always voted on a margin, voted Republican. Okay, so then what I want to look at is here's the YouGov polls. So generally speaking, and this first one is this one here is what the panel is in July. This is August, and that's our first poll in September. And you can see that in general, the Democrats have between a 9 and 10-point lead over Republicans. So that's the first thing. So when I'm trying to look at what Bill Barnett said about predicting, you're trying to predict what's going to happen, I want to know how many Democrats there are and how many Republicans. So, and here, there are more Democrats now than there were in 2012. Okay? And now the second one, presidential vote intent. These are Democrats. These are Democrats in June, August, and September. I have some more recent data, which I'll show you in just a second. But you can see that Mrs. Clinton started running into trouble. She was at 82%, then she was at 73%, and then she bumped up a little bit to 77%. That was right after the first debate. But in short, she hadn't yet sealed the deal with Democrats. Obama was at 93%. She wasn't there. Now, how about Trump? So this is Trump in June and August, and then now we have September. And again, Trump hadn't sealed the deal. He went from 74 to 77. Then after the first debate, he was back down to 72. So you can see on that grounds that the deal isn't sealed. It's not exactly like there's more uncertainty out there among the parties. And now this is independents. And this is independents in, again, July, I'm sorry, that should be June, July, no, June, July, and September. But again, the point is that among independents, Trump was winning, but he's not winning by enough to make up that partisan difference. So through most of this, it got down to 2 points at one point, but most of the time we were 3, 4 points for Mrs. Clinton with this recontact survey. Now, here is the kind of plot of that. And here is, I could not finish plotting it this morning, but I did have our latest poll after Mrs. Trump did not have a good week. Mrs. Clinton is now at 88% of Democrats, big jump up. Trump is at 81, and now independents are split dead even. That's in our poll. I just saw a Fox poll, and the Fox poll has her at about 91% of Democrats, and she now leads among independents 36, 35, and Trump has fallen to 74% among Republicans. So as I look at the election, it seems to me that the only thing that's kind of striking is we still have 15, 16% who won't go. So 8% or so still say they'll vote for Johnson, Stein, some other third-party candidate, and 8% say they're undecided, okay? So we know that third-party candidates, as you get closer to the election, the normal pattern for them is to fall. John Anderson, when he ran, nice to be able to mention that. Some people know who he was. John Anderson was at like 13, 14%, ended up with much less, 4.5, something like that. But the bottom line is the vote for those candidates. Ralph Nader in 2000 was at 6, 7%, finally falls to below 2. So we expect that that 15, 16% that's undecided or is voting for a third, we assume some will move. So we pull them aside and we ask them to say, okay, and we don't ask this of anyone else, but just the people who are undecided or voting for the, we say, if the election were held, who would you vote for? If you had to vote. So if you had to choose, so we're trying to say, can we guess if it's going to move at the end, which way is it going to move? We do this, I call a force question. If you had to choose, would you are likely to vote? And here, again, you see Mrs. Clinton gets 39-24. And I believe if I had time to analyze our poll, which the data were just coming out 10 o'clock this morning, I believe that that gap, I believe there are going to be fewer. That 15% is going to go down to 10%, and the numbers for Trump will go down some more. So I think he's 8 points down. So here's the battle. So we do we YouGov. I'm not paid by them. I'm on an advisory board, but I advise it so I can get data. We do, YouGov also does the battleground states, so we super sample 5,000 voters in each of the battleground states. And so this is the battleground state poll, which is different from the one I talked about. So this was July or August, where Mrs. Clinton was at 217 and Trump was 191, where kind of the big states where Colorado was up, Iowa was up, Wisconsin, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Virginia, North Carolina, Florida, and New Hampshire. Those states were we weren't sure who would win. And this is pre the first debate when Trump, the email stuff had come out, and it was pretty close then. That's the point where we had her up by 1 point. And now you can see that the Electoral College gap has tightened. And you have, again, the same states up, but other states had swung. Okay, so what's it look like today? Today, our last poll was we had 260 for Mrs. Clinton, with the states that were up for grabs are Nevada, Florida, Georgia, Ohio, and Minnesota. So I believe that Iowa will go for Trump, and I think Arizona will go for Trump. I believe Florida will go for Clinton. Georgia will go for Trump, and Ohio will also go for Trump. So, but that's plenty of votes to take her over. So the question is, it doesn't, as you look at that map, it looks pretty hard for him to be able to get there. And now I have to finish with the Senate. So here's the Senate today, 46, we have 46 Democrat. The only state we have for sure swinging is we have Illinois going to the Democrats. So what other states are up? I'm just going to give these up because I'll give you my prediction, because if I'm wrong, who cares? What can you do? What can you do to me? Ooh, he was wrong. So I think Indiana will go Democratic. I think New Hampshire, Kelly Ayotte will lose. Rubio will win Florida. I have no idea in Nevada. And so my prediction would be, and Wisconsin will also ultimately go Democrats. So my prediction at this point is 50-50, 50 Democrat, 50, although it could go 51-49 at this point. Now, to the extent that Mrs. Clinton's lead increases, that drops the Republicans' candidate. Now, what about the House of Representatives? Well, that's hard to move. So we have 200, they have 231, you need 218. They have 207 seats over here in these two categories that look pretty safe to us. And then the Democrats have a whole bunch of seats that look safe there. So it's only this set of seats in here. So my best guess at this point is it's closer than it was 10 days ago. 10 days ago, I would have said the Republicans will lose 8 seats. Now the Republicans, I think, are at about 220, 222 for sure. But if Mrs. Clinton lead continues to pop up, then it could be at stake. The generic ballot question, which is the one we usually ask, if you had to vote in the election, would you vote for a Democrat or Republican? The Democrats are now close. It's 4.4. Generally, that has to be around somewhat over 6 to change as many seats as are necessary. So I think that's it. Questions? Just a second, I have to turn on my, what is that? What do you call those things? Hearing assisted, yeah, okay.
I have a question.
Oh, yeah, sorry, Becky.
Do you think there are any closet Trump supporters that won't give you the proper answer but may come out and support him?
Well, so that's a question that comes up all the time. So we take that seriously. It's somewhat similar to the Bradley effect that people talked about. So I went back, we went back and looked at all of our polls in the primaries. That is, YouGov, were we off in any YouGov economist polls, were we off in any of the primaries? And sure, but we were within 2 or 3 points. Did we predict the state wrong? No. When we thought Trump would win, he won. So the best is what you say possible? Yes. Do we have any evidence of it? I can't find it. So the best we could do was go back and look at what people said they'd vote and how the state vote turned out in the primaries. We didn't get any difference there. On the other hand, I don't have Democratic blue-collar voters. I don't have Democratic people who would normally vote Democratic who are blue-collar. They might not say they're the set. So we're looking at them and oversampling them, and thus far have not found any evidence of it. Doesn't mean it's not there, but I don't think it is. Yes.
Yeah, as to the economic, the state of the economy. Yep. Has this been looked at that as that was understood to be a phenomenon? To convince people that the economy is doing well with without power, or that it's doing well with power.
That's a very smart question, and yeah, unfortunately I will. The reason is I can't answer it. So he says, so has anybody looked at the fact that as people see what's going on with the economy, they tailor their campaigns to it. And as they start to tailor their campaign to it, that would interact back and change. So that's called an endogeneity problem. And we've collected the data back to 1992. And my colleague Doug Rivers, who is a superb statistician, he'll have to solve. We know that's a problem, and he's working on it. But I personally am not capable of solving that problem. And as you can see why it's a difficult problem, but he says he's got some model that can do it, and I believe him when he does it. So, I mean, he's capable, but it's a tough problem. It's a very good question. So it just could be endogenous, and we don't know. Oh, all right, so the economy is booming. We're paying off the debt. There's 2 people unemployed in America. We're all getting rich. And Al Gore decides to run to the left. His campaign slogan should have been, "You like the last 8 years? Stick with me. I'll keep my zipper up, and the next 4 years will be great." I mean, if he ran with that campaign, he wins. But for some reason, he chose to run to the left, giving Bush an opportunity to come in with compassionate conservatism and take the votes. So when we mean by the worst vote, all those models predicted that the Democrats would win by 8 points. Now, they did win the popular vote, but the fact that it was as close as it was is what we mean by a bad campaign.
Quick reminder.
Yep. Oh, well, yeah, okay, so I don't know what's happening, so I have no idea. Are you asking the question? Oh, no.
Thank you very much. On that note, how do you incorporate the individual campaigns and politicians into the larger macro economic picture?
Well, the way I tried to model it, another good question. Can I ask somebody ask me a question? Straightforward question. Who's going to win? No. Look, so his question is, how do I know how much is the campaign and how much is other? So the way I used to use that economic model was to say that was the baseline, that all ceteris paribus, all other things being equal, then you would expect that would be the result. So you could try and measure the campaign based on how well that model predicted, and then you could look at mistakes. So we would poll, say in 2012, we polled remember the Romney 47% mark and the Etch-a-Sketch, and we had all that stuff in, and it turns out that those things don't matter very much. I'll give you an example. On the 47%, Kent won't vote for me because blah, blah, blah. So the first week we asked that question, about 65% actually had heard of it and got it right. They knew who said it. A week later, it was down to like 50% remembered it. At the end of 1 month, only 35% of voters remembered it, and half of them got it wrong. They thought it had been said by the other candidate. So those aren't the things. So then the problem is the aggregation problem, right? It builds up. Okay, it simply builds up, and then suddenly people decide on the basis of all that evidence, but it's hard to put that evidence together. So let me say on the Fox News poll, which I just got from Darren Shaw, who's their pollster. They have a Republican and Democrat. Darren's the Republican who does that poll. He just sent me their results, and they find now that there's a swing. Women over 45, 12% moved away from Trump from their previous poll, and they had women over 45 and elderly people had also moved 11 points. And in their polls, Mrs. Clinton now led on everything, even this is the most amazing thing, of people who thought that the president's health care program should be repealed. 52% of them thought that she would do a better job on health care than him. So there's movement now. There should still be some movement back, but it's that kind of aggregate movement that you try to measure, and it's hard. I have no idea, yeah.
Well, can I ask a question? So I'm a visitor here from Hong Kong.
Okay?
So we, from outside looking in, we couldn't figure out.
Say that again, please.
We we are disappointed at the quality of the candidates because
Well, that certainly makes you unusual.
I think with this country, so many brilliant people, you know, and here, the politicians, I don't know what they're doing. Can you explain? I mean, you should do a survey and find out why they pick these kind of candidates.
I don't need a survey. In 1831, Alexis de Tocqueville, who wrote what is still the best book on American politics, American democracy, Alexis de Tocqueville has a chapter, and the chapter is entitled, well, how could America fail? Well, what's the reason? And his answer was, it will fail because the quality of its candidates, the people who are in Congress, who he just finished having lunch with Daniel Webster and Davy Crockett. And he said, gee, the really smart Americans never run. They all get MBAs. Just kidding. So the answer is, we've always had that, but this year, I have no answer to your question. I mean, it's a damn good question, and I have no answer. I don't know how it could have happened. I mean, I could BS for a while, but that's what it'd be. Yeah, sorry, she wants you to take the mic.
There seems to be a large number of folks who would say, I'm not voting for either one, but may vote down ballot. And that seems to be very unusual, right? So,
Yep.
Thoughts on that?
So, have you been advising Paul Ryan lately? So what that means is, in 1992, the Republicans they won their first majority in the House. They had to control the United States House, first time in 40 years, 1994, and they had control of the Senate, but they won that in 80. So they decided, they knew Dole was going to lose, and Senator Dole knew he was going to lose. So they concentrated their campaign on states and ways to keep the House of Representatives. They moved the campaign money away from the presidential campaign, had Dole move to states where it might make a difference, his appearing, and they put all their money there. I think that's what you're going to see the Republicans start to do, and I actually believe with the polls that are now coming out, one poll has 11-point lead. The Fox poll has, I think, an 8 or 9-point lead. So I think what's going to happen, their candidates are now going to start to say that. They're going to start to say, look, I know Republican congressional candidates are going to start to say, look, I know we've lost the presidency. Don't let her have the House and the Senate. So I think that's the next. And in terms of our polling, we decided 2 days ago that we would start to lay off on the polling president. We'll do some, but we're going to concentrate our effort on the House and Senate because that's where we believe the action is. So I think that's what's happened. I got time for one or two more, yeah. Are there any elections that have, are there any, geez, sorry I asked. Are there any previous elections that were, had so much hate? Yeah, lots of them. And they ran against Andrew Jackson's wife, saying she was a prostitute. Remember Grover Cleveland, Ma, their slogan against him was, Ma, where's my pa? Because he'd had a child out of wedlock. Warren Harding, when he got the nomination, and they called and said, you have to call your mistress to find out if she'll tell, da-da-da-da. So there have been. Now, that hasn't happened since the rise, really, of radio and TV. Now, and this is just pure speculation, but I think one of the things that happened was when we had 3 TV stations, when an event occurred, there was kind of a common Walter Cronkite interpretation of them. Can you imagine mentioning to Stanford undergraduates a Walter Cronkite interpretation? Yeah. Walter, there was a common sort of interpretation. And the point I'm making is in the days in which those campaigns were so vile, remember the Lincoln campaign was not pretty for the president. But in those days, the press was not objective. It was exceedingly partisan. Right? There was a Republican paper, a Democrat paper, a Whig paper, et cetera, et cetera. So now what's happened with our media is we've started to go away from that, right? News, if you watch Fox News, it says something. If you listen to NPR, it says something. So that's sort of broken up. You can listen to whatever you want. You can only listen to one side, not get the others. And the TV, regular news stations don't have an hour-long report. Not as many people watching. So we're kind of going back. So my hypothesis is roughly, we're sort of going back to that old partisan press. And partisan presses are maybe inclined to give you those kinds of primaries. And so we'll see. Now, Timothy Garton-Ash, a British scholar, has been studying this in Europe and the US. And he argues that because in the European countries, they don't allow so many different kind of stations, they don't get the same kind of phenomenon. And he has some data on that. It's a really good idea. I'm not convinced that the data show that it's correct yet. So I'll take that one more. Yeah, okay.
Yes, could you speak to the importance of women generally and the importance of women and the importance of women to the electorate?
Well, I'm married. I've been married for 47 years. I have 3 daughters who still speak to me. They still speak to me, and they all make more money than I do, and I'm really happy about that. So women in the electorate that's Trump's biggest problem, obviously, and they've fallen away more. So they're 53% of the electorate. In general, my friend Morris Fiorina has a paper that argues that women tend to be more democratic because in general, they're nicer, kinder, more sympathetic, and want to reach out to help people in comparison to men. And there's a significant amount of survey research data that shows that. But in significance of women in general, I'll give you the names and addresses of my daughters, and you can write them, and they can tell you. So thank you very much.